Welcome to the Sanilac Flashlight, shining the light on the most interesting newsmakers and residents shaping the landscape of Michigan's thumb. The opinions, ideas, and experiences. If it affects Sanilac County, you'll hear the story here. Now, your host, Bretton Jones.
And welcome to the first podcast edition of the Sanilac Flashlight. This is your host, Bretton Jones. I'm here today with 83rd District Representative Shane Hernandez. Shane, how are you doing, sir?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Very well. So, Shane, we have you on today to talk about, first and foremost, the upcoming meeting this Saturday at Liberty Lanes in Sandusky, Michigan, with regards to Second Amendment sanctuary county status.
Yeah, there'll be a meeting 12:30 Saturday at Liberty Lanes. I actually just had a constituent reach out and ask if I was willing to talk to a few people about the Second Amendment and what was going on in Virginia, and I said, yeah, not a problem. Didn't realize it was going to turn into a huge thing, but that's okay. I'm fine with that. I'm happy to see a lot of people following the issue.
Yeah. Can you, so after what happened in Virginia, we had a number of state representatives and I believe a couple senators from Michigan introduce similar legislation here. Can you sort of bring us up to speed with what's happening there?
Yeah, I'm aware of one resolution in particular, I believe, from Representative Gary Eisen. He's the 81st House District. He serves most of St. Clair County, actually, so close to Sanilac, where he is basically a resolution stating support for the Second Amendment and that the state of Michigan doesn't believe that we need more gun laws. Again, it is simply a resolution. I saw a lot of confusion about it online, what it really meant. It's a resolution from the legislature saying this is where we stand, this is what we feel. Obviously, it's up to us as a legislature whether or not we bring up bills that are additional restrictions or removing restrictions. So it's separate from actual law, but it's a way for the current legislature to state their position on the issue.
Okay. So essentially this would be a state law that is stating that, well, it would be like for the entire state of Michigan and is going to state that the current
basically
number...
a resolution reaffirming our support of the Second Amendment is what it is.
Okay, so there's no law attached to it. It's just a non-binding
Correct.
resolution. Okay.
Correct.
So the laws that are being introduced, though, I'm talking about the ones being introduced by Democrats, like actual red flag laws. Are you familiar with any of those laws?
I am familiar with the red flag law that have been put out there. They're sitting awaiting committee hearings. Personally, I hope they don't even get a committee hearing. They may, but I do not believe, and I've actually seen the Speaker of the House put out a statement, and these bills will not pass in the House as long as he's Speaker. So these are laws that have clearly serious concerns about due process and taking away people's Second Amendment rights. They're things that I will not support.
Okay. Yeah, and I think really what seems to have everybody up in arms as of late, especially with the back and forth that we've sort of seen coming out of Virginia with the counties and the sheriffs saying one thing and the governor saying, well, I'll do this. And, it's a lot of silliness as far as I'm concerned. And I don't think that anything's really ever going to come out of this. I think you can sort of push people who believe in the Second Amendment. You can push them, a great deal. But ultimately, when you start talking force, it becomes very different in people's minds. And that's kind of what I've picked up on over the past couple of weeks in Michigan.
Yes, I feel like Virginia has been very much a testing ground to see how far you can press this. I've even seen some of the legislation there already. They're trying to peel back on some of it as people have pressed back, as the counties have gone out and made their statements of being sanctuary needs or work to get their sheriffs on board to not enforce some of these laws. But, I feel like they're testing the limits and seeing what can we get done. Is it a magazine limit? Is it a limit specifying certain things or aspects of a firearm to essentially make certain firearms illegal, to say you can't have an adjustable buttstock and a pistol grip and things like that. You're essentially making certain firearms illegal without saying it. So very much testing the waters there. And what you're seeing in Michigan is people realizing this is a real threat and a reaction to it, people getting active and wanting to know where their legislators stand and what can they do about it.
Mm-hmm. So the laws that are coming out of the counties themselves, these county ordinances, essentially, they're it's a county that is essentially saying these state laws, we're no longer going to enforce them. Some of the counties have put laws in place that have put real penalties in place for any agency, whether it's state or federal, that does come in and try to take anybody's weapons. And then some of the ordinances, one of the ordinances in particular, actually recognizes the militia as a local entity. And I was sort of curious about that. You know, we use the word militia in the Second Amendment, but we don't really have any sort of like local entity that's called the militia. We don't have any sort of formalized group there. And I was wondering, you know, is that something that we should put in place as far as just recognizing it? And what is the militia even? Like, can you sort of shed some light on that as from a constitutional perspective?
Sure, and I haven't followed specifically some of the resolutions you referenced or the laws you referenced that are coming out of Virginia. I guess my opinion on the militia is it's the people, and it's when people decide to come together and stand against something. So, you know, I don't know that I feel like there needs to be any law passed stating that, nor do I think it would be done properly if it was. But I think the people have that right and the ability in this country to stand together and come together and stand against these things. You know, I think one important thing to point out, some of what I've seen talked about recently is our counties passing resolutions saying we are a sanctuary county. I think it's really important to point out that unless you have a sheriff willing to enforce that, I don't know how meaningful that is. So I think people need to be building those relationships, working with their sheriffs on whether or not are you going to actually stand against state laws that are passed that are violating our rights, or is it just a resolution that is just words on the paper that there really is no mechanism to do anything about it. So I think that's an important thing that needs to be addressed and done. I haven't followed extremely closely in Virginia how many of those counties are doing that, but I think people need to engage with their sheriffs here in Michigan if they want to go down this path.
And there's really nothing that we need to worry about at this point as far as from a federal level. I mean, we haven't had we've had bump stocks made illegal, and certain parts of the country have been making 30-round magazines illegal. It's still the age of purchasing 18, or they changed that to 21?
Oh, off the top of my head, I would have to look at that. I think it's 18 for a rifle and 21 for a handgun in Michigan. I wouldn't quote me on that.
I'll have to check that myself.
It may be a different age. But I do think you're right, though. You're seeing a lot of these restrictions come more on a state side than on a federal level, individual states, whether it's magazine limits or, like I said earlier, I think one of the bills proposed in Virginia had you can't have two or more of, and then it had a whole list that had adjustable stocks, pistol grips, things like that. Essentially, every AR out there in production has two or more of them. And so I think you're seeing it more on a state-by-state level. We've seen states across the country pass the magazine limits. I think at what was Maryland at one time. I don't know if they still are 10 rounds and things like that, which would make a great deal of even just everyday handguns illegal. I think you're right on where that threat is more right now is on the state level.
Mm-hmm. And, like you mentioned, you have to have a sheriff who's willing to support you in your sanctuary status. So I think that really highlights just what an important election year it is after, we've had 12 great years, I feel, from Gary Benecke as far as someone who, affirms and supports the rule of law as well as, the United States Constitution. I guess just highlights how important it is that we select the next one very wisely.
Yeah, very true. I mean, if your local enforcement isn't willing to stand against this, then you can pass all the resolutions you want. It's not going to matter. So, yes, you're right. It's very important to have a sheriff that understands that and will support it.
Mm-hmm. Well, again, it's really just watching this develop and seeing what happens. I don't want to jump to conclusions. I don't want to talk conjecture, and I didn't want to really get too far into the weeds. Mostly just wanted to talk with you today and let everybody know about the meeting that's coming up this Saturday. It's 12:30 at Liberty Lanes in Sandusky.
That's correct.
Shane Hernandez, thank you very much for taking part in our first podcast here.
Thank you.
Enjoy your day, man.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Sanilac Flashlight, shining the light on the most interesting newsmakers and residents of Michigan's thumb. This is a listener-focused show, so we want you to know what you want to know. Join the conversation on topics discussed today, and keep up to date with the latest local personalities of Sanilac County at www.sanilacflashlight.com. Remember to like us on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel to stay up to date on the latest news and information affecting you right here in the thumb. For the Sanilac Flashlight, I'm Kyla. Until next time, take care of yourself and each other.